My third kid was delivered through emergency cesarean section due to complications during labor. The atmosphere during the delivery or operation was one of hushed whispers and whispered conversation. Very little is discussed or elaborated on. A pervasive sense of dread throughout the whole thing. After the delivery or operation was finished, I was able to see my new baby in the maternity ward where I was staying. It was to be anticipated that I would be in a lot of pain, but I was also experiencing what I considered to be an abnormal degree of agony. Because I had 2 previous cesarean sections, I was aware that this one would be different in terms of how it felt. I was reassured that everything was fine and that the healing process was proceeding normally. 2 days later, I was given permission to return home. When I finally made it home, I had the hope that I would start to feel better again. However, after that, there was a period of 10 days in which there was a hushed awareness. I felt as like I wasn't quite myself, but I couldn't place what was wrong with me. Following 2 more appointments with the midwife, it was determined that everything was fine, despite the fact that my infant was suffering from weight loss and I was out of breast milk. My assertions of general disquiet, however, were attributed to the fact that I had recently undergone surgery. Neither the medical personnel nor I found any of these symptoms to be cause for concern. On the other hand, it was seen that I had an exceptionally large quantity of bruising close to the incision. My doctor was informed of this by the midwife, and he was instructed to keep an eye on it. If I was concerned about it, I should schedule an appointment with my doctor. The preceding 10 days passed in a haze. I was conscious of the fact that my infant was very calm and non-talkative, rarely shed tears, and spent much of her time sleeping. It wasn't until around the 7th day that it occurred to me that I didn't have any milk in the house. He started sobbing, which was really out of character for him, and it all began to make sense. That night, in an effort to comfort him, we used the last of the milk that we had stored in the refrigerator. By this point, I had already started to bleed, drops with a bright crimson color. At first, there was nothing particularly worrisome to report. It seemed strange to me, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. The bleeding increased heavier over the next 3 days, and by the 9th day, I was unable to keep up with the pad changes because I was bleeding so much. Despite my lack of worry, I decided to phone the doctor. I arrived on time for my appointment, and then settled in to nurse my child. I had not been sitting here for very long when I suddenly became acutely aware of something. A sense of completion, perhaps. An eruption that is on the verge of starting. My spouse had just arrived home at that same time when the door opened. Arrived home in plenty of time to get a bite to eat. An overwhelming sense of necessity compelled me to hand up the infant to him. I couldn't deny the fact that I needed to get up. And at that point, the deluge started. My legs felt heavy and warm as the blood continued to drip down them. The flow was comparable to a torrent. My spouse had set the baby down at some point, and at that moment he was clutching onto me instead. I was sobbing and sobbing into his shoulder as I leaned against him. What exactly is going on? Simply put, I did not comprehend what I was seeing or feeling at the time. I attempted to halt the flow by squeezing my legs as tightly together as possible. To no avail. Then, all of a sudden, I saw how ridiculous it was to try to exert any sort of control over it. I came to the conclusion that there was nothing I could do that would make a difference, therefore I had no choice but to accept the situation as it was. I was filled with a sense of tranquility, despite the strong feeling that the entirety of my existence was slowly leaking away before my eyes. Both time and space moved at a glacial pace. It was clear to me that decisions and choices were being made. I took a deep breath in and held it for a while, and then I noticed the universe growing and changing. I was then made aware of the fact that I had a choice about my level of fear and dread. Alternately, I might make the decision to give up, let go, give up control over my life. And I realized that there was in point of fact no other option. There was just one of them, let go. And it was as if I were completely relinquishing control of my life. While my husband was rushing around trying to get everything in order, he locked me in the bathroom with the shower running. Because of his anxiety, he failed to remember to turn on the hot water. The absurd notion that I was about to die of internal bleeding while standing in a frigid shower caused me to burst out laughing. But as I watched the blood flowing in a steady stream, I couldn't help but let out a little sob. Big, deep tears were shed. Experiencing the ebb and flow of my life before my eyes has a really settling and reassuring impact on me. And at this point, there was nothing that could halt the blood. To stem the flow, I stuffed a cloth in the space between my legs. It came to my attention that there was blood splattered throughout the floor, everywhere, and that terrifying feeling returned. After that, I let out a breath. That glacial pace, that more evolved aspect of me took control. She was very aware of the situation and sped up everything she could, and nothing moved beyond its previous glacial pace. The rate of my husband's speech seemed unnaturally rapid, moving far too quickly. The driver was going too fast. I begged him to slow down on many occasions in a voice that was very measured and composed. He stared at me like I was insane. The experience of getting to the hospital was stressful. Everyone around me appeared to be in a state of emergency. I was unable to square it with the way I was currently feeling. Calm, still, quiet. I wanted to sleep. After being taken to a larger hospital, I came to the conclusion that the lights, sirens, and rapid acceleration of the ambulance were an exaggerated response to the situation. The nurse and the medic who had been standing next to me continued to move quickly. As soon as I arrived at the hospital, I was given cannula after cannula to insert into my arms and hands in preparation for the operation. Each new physician inquired about what, when, and how, and I believe I explained it to them. Although my recall of the event is really fuzzy at this point, I had the impression that I was speaking too softly and slowly for them to fully comprehend what I was saying. This place caused me to lose consciousness for a good number of hours. When I came to, I found out that they were taking me by helicopter to a hospital in the city. I believe this to be the very first time that reality has set in. I was instantly aware of where I was and what was taking place, at which point I started crying once more. Because I needed to be in a stable enough condition to take the flight, the airplane had to wait for many more hours. Eventually, it was late in the evening that I found myself sitting on a stretcher in an open hangar, covered in blankets, ready to board the flying doctor's jet. After regaining consciousness, I looked around and noticed that the night sky was filled with stars. And just like that, the vast space that had separated me from those stars vanished into thin air. I was mindful of the fact that the stars, the universe, and awareness were all a part of me. I was able to locate my presence here. Under the light of these stars, I had the perception that everything was interrelated and part of a totality. And at the same time, it was like nothing out of the ordinary. I felt such enormous delight. I was a contributor to this. During the drive towards the city, I had the distinct impression that I was being wholly supported and encircled by what can only be described as angelic creatures. Therefore, they were so close that I had the impression I could touch them. Although the doctor tried to keep me asleep by gently shaking me awake, I truly wanted to be with them. Each time, I looked up at him and smiled. In that condition of semi-consciousness, there was such a sense of calm. Everything was illuminated with a warm golden sheen. I was waiting in a private room adjacent to the operating theater right up until the moment when I had to go under the knife. The anesthesiologist was standing very next to me. She told me that she would see whether they were ready for me, and then she left me alone after making her inquiry. During that time, I found myself welling up with tears once more. As I laid there, I could feel big, sluggish tears flowing down my cheeks. I couldn't believe how weary I felt. I am just very exhausted. Weary of the soul, I came to the conclusion that I no longer wanted to be kept awake. I simply desired to go to sleep. And while I slept, I was conscious of the fact that I would soon be ending my life. And I came to the conclusion that it was the simplest choice I had ever been presented with. I could feel both my body and my thoughts starting to relax. Then I noticed a hand standing close by me, and a voice that was both authoritative and joyful asked me, "Are you going to come with us then, or remaining in this spot?" And I was aware of the significance of this. I felt conscious of leaving my body behind. My previous existence was depicted to me in the form of a brief apocalyptic scenario, and I was informed that this had been my life, a life spent in constant terror. After that, I stretched out for that hand, and for a single second, my thoughts went to my loved ones back home. I had an instantaneous feeling that everything will work out for them. They were responsible for their own lives. Then there was the freedom, huge and packed to capacity, comprehending and being aware of. I was quickly ripped out of my body and sent somewhere else. After then, there was some music, and there were fireworks, a joyous occasion on each and every level. Angelic choirs and rejoicing may be heard. I felt liberated. I had no sense of weight. a concentrated ray of light flying, climbing to great heights across the clear blue sky. The light was enormous, and it shone in every single direction. Everywhere you look, there is blue and dazzling sky. In those first few seconds, I was able to really appreciate the beauty that is freedom. After that, I had little trouble figuring out where I should be. I embarked on a journey on a certain course. When moving at such a breakneck speed across that expanse, the sensation of being overwhelmed by the vastness and interconnection of everything was overwhelming. I had merged my consciousness with that of God. I was conscious of the super-expanded version of myself, yet I was still aware of myself as myself, the one that was aware of everything and saw everything. In the distance, I could make out a building that was suspended in the air. This was the destination that I had in mind. It was in the shape of a circle. I looked up and noticed 3 light beams coming from the sky moving in that direction. I felt absolute elation. I was aware of who they were, and I looked forward to seeing them once more. I had finally arrived at this enormous library. Even though none of the others were from my prior life, welcoming them felt very much like greeting old friends and relatives. These had been around for far longer than that, cycling together across the course of time. Some of them have not been physically present for hundreds or perhaps millions of years. I was at home with them at the time. In addition to that, we were overjoyed to see one another. We carried on a conversation while reflecting on the past. We spoke about the stories from my life. We spoke about contracts and the overall objective. What did I think about the course of my life? After that, someone handed me a book. I only gave it a quick glance, but it seemed to be empty. There was a blank on every page. After that, I turned the page to find some text on it. And as soon as I saw those 2 words, I realized that I was getting my life back on track. I was going to return. This was a choice that was backed by everyone, and I was often asked whether this was what I wanted. I had a strong feeling that if I didn't, I would end myself repeating this activity later on. This thing called life, another coming into being, another incarnation, yet another excursion. And I was aware that there was a chance I may never receive it again. Self-worth had been my adversary for many, many incarnations in the past. They number in the thousands. A tremendous river rushing by me in a hurry, and I was aware of it. This was the last remaining challenge to conquer. As soon as I had made up my mind, I left the library and went to another location. I took some time to visit with my family. I made my way out into the nothingness, certain that I would encounter them once more in the future. And I started to have the sensation that I was going down a level. As the light began to dim, I reclaimed my familiar physical form and watched as the brightness of the light continued to decrease. Out of the atoms that were around me, my physical body started to materialize. They were forming vast groupings and layering themselves all over my body as they did so. I was able to sense them settling into their positions all around my energy body. They shielded and energized me at the same time. It was very much like draping oneself in an elegant robe and allowing it to spread its warmth throughout my entire body. It was an indescribable sensation that I am still able to experience to this day. I landed on a road after my attempt. It was both broad and lengthy. On each side of the path there is tall grass and flowers that are softly swaying in the air. As I got up and started moving about, I could make out the outline of a home in the distance. As I came closer, I could make out voices in the distance, laughter, chatting. After then, I saw a number of individuals congregating in a garden setting. After entering the property through the front gate, I made my way to the main entrance. It seemed to me that none of these people's features were familiar to me at all. When I went into the house, the light was dimmer than usual, like a gentle orange and golden sheen. I was surprised to see that there were so many newborns, toddlers, and young children in the room. Everyone who was outside was an adult. These young children were supporting one another by holding hands and receiving assistance from older people, such as their grandparents. Some of the youngsters were climbing the steps over on the side, while others were being carried up them. After I had caught up with them on the stairs, I noticed that some little children were holding both of my hands. At the top of the steps, I could make out an elderly couple who were comforting the little children and infants by giving them hugs and speaking to them. As soon as I reached the peak, they surrounded me in a bear hug and spoke sweet nothings into my ear. After that, the youngsters were led to a number of different entrances to explore. I just stood there and observed for a bit. I wasn't sure if I really wanted to be here. Grandma made a beckoning move toward me. "Are you all set up?" she inquired. I smiled and shook my head. She inquired of me a total of 3 times before finally saying, "Come and assist us." Therefore, I positioned myself at the top of the steps and spoke tender words of encouragement into the ears of each youngster. After a little while, she turned her attention to me, a look that begs the question. I nodded and went up. I entered the room through a door, and once inside, there was a mirror mounted on one of the walls. The atmosphere in the room was warm and radiant but subdued. I moved closer to the mirror so that I could examine my pupils. "Are you all set up?" I asked. I had my doubts, but I went ahead and did it anyhow. Vroom, sucked back into the confines of my body, coming to after having had surgery. The first thing that came out of my mouth was, "I am here." Due to the fact that I was intubated, my hoarse voice could not be heard very far. The midwife came into my bed and said, "Oh, you're awake," before handing me a piece of ice to chew on. I had returned, in my body, to date in my life, prepared to carry out my mission. I've lost a total of 4 liters of blood. 6 pints of blood and 15 pints of plasma were given to me via transfusion. My uterine arteries were cauterized, and as a result, I was never able to restore my ability to provide milk for my infant child. After a lengthy stay in the hospital, I continued my recovery at home with the assistance of a caregiver. To recreate the story of my life has been a process that has thus far taken me 6 years. I feel as though I have been reincarnated in many respects. I've forgotten a lot of things, had an extremely severe case of the dark night of the soul, during which I acquired anxiety, sadness, and post-traumatic stress disorder. I had a strong desire to rekindle that relationship, and I spent many sleepless hours pondering the means by which I could do it. After the initial rush of exhilaration, I completely lost touch with reality and was unable to carry on any regular level of functioning. But little by little, day by day, I started to feel that inner calm and grace even while I was awake. I started to become aware of the tedium, the expansiveness, and the options. I started to have love for myself. I was steady, unhurried, and reflective in my manner. Everything about me slowed down, the way I moved, how I breathed, how I spoke. My entire existence was turned upside down. Now I am assisting other people in gaining access to the natural calm that exists inside them. Through facing the facts, embracing acceptance, letting go, and becoming in love with oneself, bringing them closer to their history, their family tree, and the knowledge that despite the enormity of this place, we are not alone. At all times connected component of the total system, consciousness that is a part of the whole. Everything matters, yet at the same time, nothing does.